When Alcmene, the mother of the famous hero Hercules, appears in Ovid's Metamorphoses, then she is the first of only two older women to be narrators in the story. Now, Ovid's Metamorphoses contain different episodes, and some of these are told by the regular, all-knowing primary narrator, and some are told by secondary narrators, which are characters within the work that tell stories. And so Alcmene is one of them. She's the mother of Hercules, so guess what she talks about? All about Hercules. Ovid tells us that she tells of the great deeds of her son, and even when she does talk about herself, then it's still related to him, as she tells of the struggles and toils throughout her pregnancy and childbirth. Now, generalizing this, we see that women in the Roman Empire were always, in whatever they did or said, linked to a man. However, that does not mean that even in the male-centered narratives of Latin literature, that there was no space at all for female voices, experiences, and feelings. Of course, there wasn't much, and especially not of actual Roman women talking about their lives and their experiences. But we can still look at classical literature and see how female characters are constructed, even though it's by male authors who are from a high class. And I think Ovid is a really great example for this because, we know Ovid as telling misogynist stories and stories of abuse and harassment and of young nymphs being chased by male gods. And it's very important to talk about these things, about how problematic these stories are, especially when we bring them to schools and adapt them into children's books. But right now, I don't want to focus on that because it is also agreed that Ovid offers a certain space for female voices and the female psyche. He is quite interested in it, as we can see, for example, in his work, The Heroides, in which he writes from the perspective of famous female mythological characters addressing the men in their stories, such as Medea and Jason. But even in the Metamorphoses, there are certain spaces for female experiences and narrating these experiences. Marginalized voices in Latin literature are female voices, lower class voices, but also voices of people that are not adults. And this is something that we still see in our current culture as well, and that's the issue of heteronormativity, which basically means that being adult and having adult experiences is the norm in society. That is what the whole society is built around. And so if you are not an adult, either you are too young as a child or you're too old as an old person, then you are considered deviant. In a lot of stories, we also have characters that are either adult or, in the case of gods, immortal, and so forever perfectly young adults. What I want to focus on is one of these deviant characters, and that is the Sibyl, who is an old woman. So she is marginalized not only because she is a woman, but also because she's old, which means that gender studies and aging studies are combined when we look at characters like these. And this is where the theoretical framework of anocriticism comes in, which developed throughout the 90s and basically looks at the intersection of gender and age. And so I want to use this as an example for Ovid's Metamorphoses, because there is this character, the Sibyl, who is just so interesting and people just do not talk about her enough, let me tell you. The Sibyl of Cumae is famously known from Virgil's Aeneid, in which the Sibyl guides Aeneas to the underworld and she gets him back out safely. She is also a prophetess of Apollo, so she does divination for him, etc. So she is known as the ultimate guide of the hero who goes to the deepest parts of hell and gets him out again, and he is completely transformed, etc. Now, in Ovid's version, in the Metamorphoses, book 14, we see this same travel throughout the underworld, except it is, first of all, way shorter than Virgil's version, and also we don't see anything about the actual travel throughout the underworld. So we just hear that they go to the underworld, they get out, we don't know what happened there. Already see how important her age is in the Metamorphoses with the introduction of the Sibyl, in which is said, when he, so Aeneas, had passed these by and left the walled cities of Parthenope upon the right, he came upon the left to the mount tomb of the tuneful son of Aeolus and the marshy shores of Cumae, and entering the grotto of the long-lived Sibyl, he prayed that he might pass down through Avernus' realm, so through the underworld, and see his father's shade. We see here that the Sibyl is characterized as being long-lived, as being old, but it's a very specific Latin word for old. Usually, in other cases, such as, for example, in Virgil, but also in different parts of the Metamorphoses, we see old age being described as longaiva. So it would be longaiva sibylla. Longaiva comes from longus and aevum, which literally means like a long time, during a long time. But in this case, the word that is used is vivax, and vivax comes from vivo or vivere, which means to live. It rather means something like being able to stay alive, kind of old, still living old, long living old. Like the Sibyl is somehow like managing to still live despite all of the odds. Old age of the Sibyl is important in this case as it is related to her role as a prophetess and as the guide of Aeneas to the underworld, because in the ancient world, old age was very often linked to religious and certain social functions that were available specifically to older people and especially older women. Now, the Sibyl is a prophetess of Apollo, so because of this religious function, age is an important factor and is one of the markers of her social status as well. Here we see that the Sibyl is seen or constructed as being deviant in two ways. So, first of all, as a prophetess because of her religious function, which is, of course, not a regular function, which is then stronger because of her old age. What Ovid focuses on is the journey back from the underworld, where he writes, as he, Aeneas, retraced his weary steps on the return journey, he eased the toil with discourse with his Cumaean guide. So the Sibyl starts telling her own story and is therefore the second older woman who is a narrator in the whole work of the Metamorphoses. And she tells him why she is so very old. She is 700 years old. And she tells how the god Apollo wanted to seduce her when she was still young. So he desired her and he told her that he would give her any gift if she would give up her virginity to him. Apollo said, choose where you will, maiden of Cumae, and you shall have your choice. Then, the Sibyl says, pointing to a heap of sand, I made the foolish prayer that I might have as many years of life as there were sand grains in the pile. But I forgot to ask that those years might be perpetually young. So what happens is that Apollo gives all of these years to the Sibyl, but she will actually age and not remain young as she would have wanted. Apollo says, I can still give you youth if you want that. So he granted me the years, is what she says, and he promised endless youth as well, if I would yield to love. So if she would give up her virginity to him. So here we see that the Sibyl is called a virgo, and this can mean either maiden or virgin. Both are used. However, the Sibyl is about to lose this identity somehow. She is about to lose either one of these meanings because either Apollo gives her youth, but she won't be a virgin anymore, or she will remain a virgin, but she will age and therefore never be a young maiden again. Just a side note, it was possible for an older woman to be called a virgo if it was an essential, a crucial aspect of her identity, such as with the Vestal Virgins. However, generally it did not happen because if an older woman was not married, then it was seen as unattractive and it was looked down upon because this was a way of a woman rejecting a normal adult marker of life, like this essential marker of adulthood in a female's life. So to really highlight this, Ovid later on will use not the word virgo, but inuba, which means unmarried. Furthermore, the Sibyl calls her own wish a foolish one, a foolish prayer. It's called vana, so it's kind of like in vain. And specifically, the meaning of this would be like meaningless, which is really important because age and especially certain markers throughout your age and throughout the life course is what gives your life meaning. So, for example, for women in that time, to be married is an important marker of being an adult and functioning as an adult woman in society. And it also gives a certain meaning to your life and to this certain to this specific stage in your life. By having a life course that is in separate stages with different expectations and different responsibilities, you give meaning to your life. But if, like the Sibyl, you not only reject, in this case, not really married, but you reject this marker of adulthood, but also your life is stretched so unnaturally long, then it also loses its meaning, which is also why the Sibyl calls her own wish vana or foolish. Now, eventually, the Sibyl reflects on her own age and even on her own fate when she does die in 300 years. The Sibyl calls her young life as being the joyous springtime of life, which has fled, and she says that now, with tottering step, weak old age is coming on, which for long I must endure. So there is this very clear negative connotation to old age and the aging. Now, she continues with saying that the time will come when length of days will shrivel me from my full form to but a tiny thing, and my limbs consumed by age will shrink to a feather's weight. Then will I seem never to have been loved, never to have pleased the god. Apollo himself will either gaze unknowing on me, or will deny that he ever loved me. So this is where a lot of scholars get it twisted, in my opinion, because this is exactly where we need to link gender and age to one another. Previous scholars have said that the Sibyl's main concern about growing so old and struggling with it and suffering from it is that she won't be attractive anymore, and she will seem to have never been loved or desired by the god. And this seems kind of odd because she didn't want him, and that was pretty clear. So why would she feel so sad about no longer being desired by him? There is a scholar called Nikopoulos, And he writes, even at the age of 700, she appears just as vain as when Apollo fell in love with her centuries ago. Well, first of all, this vanity was never implied, so I don't know where he got this from. But also the whole idea that the Sibyl is just vain simply because she is sad about losing her attractiveness, it should definitely be nuanced. So earlier in the fragment, we have the Sibyl describing physical vulnerability. With tottering step, old age comes. These are all very physical characteristics of growing old, growing weak as well. Losing your youthful beauty is, I would argue, the most visual aspect of aging, and therefore the one that you just see the most obviously. When we look back at the Roman Empire, then also sexual attractiveness and beauty was very suitable for very young women, but once you were an older woman, then it was kind of weird. And if you had any desires yourself, then it would also be seen as you were just a lustful hag, and it was definitely not positive because you have this very misogynist patriarchal society where women are objects of lust or they have to be attractive for marriage or whatever. And this ensures that once you grow older as a woman, your whole social status changed. Like you got way less attention of people and especially attention of men. It is very important to see how this whole social identity of an older woman changed because of it. So, older women being given less attention than in their youth when they were young and beautiful would struggle with a kind of invisibility or a feeling of invisibility. And we also see this allusion to invisibility when the Sibyl says that she will shrivel to but a tiny thing, literally being invisible. So when the Sibyl is saying how sad she is about not being young and attractive anymore, then she is in reality not saying that she misses the beauty or the being desired or whatever per se. She is saying that her social role is fundamentally changed, and she is now like the unattractive old woman. Every single age has its very specific expectations and responsibilities, and women could either could seize these opportunities and just follow the expectations, could go and marry at a specific age, have children, etc. Or in specific cases, such as some cases we see in literature, such as the Sibyl, we see how these women rejected this trajectory, became probably, well, even more marginalized than they already were. But it's interesting to see these options, to see these marginalized voices, and to see this kind of resistance of women to certain expectations and what then, what happened then. It's an interesting way to explore this through mythology and literature. We've also seen how, you know, age and gender are so linked to one another, and also how the whole male gaze and idea of desirability is linked to it, and how it isn't about the desirability per se, how it isn't about, not everything is about being beautiful and being desired, but it is a very important aspect of how a woman's social role changes. And I would argue that even today we still struggle with this. Even today, everything is about being young and beautiful. And at some point, when you reach a certain age or you look a certain age, then the expectations are different and you don't get as much attention as before. You are stereotypically seen as less desirable or less attractive. And I'm really excited to see how we might change these narratives. Because in the end, It's not about whether you're married or not, and it's not about whether you're attractive or not, and it's not even about how old you are. It's really about dealing with different social roles that you are given by a society, and about how you can deal with these ever-changing expectations. And characters from classical and ancient literature can really help us with that. Most of all, it is important to always use your voice. This is where we come back to the bigger picture of the Metamorphoses, because one way of dealing with such an invisibility for all the women in the Roman Empire was by becoming the ultimate storytellers. Women told stories to one another, just like Alcmene told stories of her son Hercules, in order to find a way to process this idea of getting less attention and finding a way to have connection with others. We even see this with the Sibyl, and I think that this is such a great line to end with, because the Sibyl ends her story with, "Though shrunk past recognition of the eye, still by my voice shall I be known, for the fates will leave me my voice."